Hi everyone, we will continue our search for truth Bible studies with lesson 10, chart 5. Right, so today's lesson is on the topic of Christianity, on to what extent does Christianity reflect God's intended church, right? Many times from the outside, people look at the church and they ask themselves, is this really the church of God? Or that, if Christianity is true, then um, why does it why is it the case that the church behaves in the way that they do, right? So in order to help us understand that, we'll try to look at some of the historical development of Christianity. First, I thought it's helpful for us to realize that whenever we use the term the church, we actually could look at it from a few different aspects or dimension. Firstly, we have the church from the point of view of what God has intended according to His word. That means the ideal church as God has intended according to His word, right? Compared to the church as an organization or an institution. We have organized religion here today, different denominations, right? The church as an organization run by people, right? At the same time, the church can also be referred to as informal groups of believers, people who are Christians gathering together or are loosely organized. Now, let us look at today's lesson and let's look at how the church historically has gone through various kinds of development that leads to some of the things we can see in church today, the supposed controversies or the supposed inconsistencies, right? So in this particular chart, we'll try to highlight some key events on how the church has developed over the years, right? So first, let's look at the early years, right? So in the early years, during the first century or so, right, we know Christianity grew rapidly during this period of time, right? This is during the days of the apostles, and we read about it quite a fair bit during the book of Acts. Now, even though it grew rapidly, it was still considered a minority religion when you compare it to the Jewish faith, right? So within the Judea, it is a faith that is smaller, both in terms of numbers and minority in terms of status, right? Um, and the Jews have heavily persecuted the Christian faith because they misunderstood that faith. They saw the Christian faith as something that is deviant and something that's violating God's truth, violating the Jewish beliefs. Not only was it persecuted by the Jews, it was increasingly seen as a threat by the Roman authorities, because wherever Christianity impacted people, there was a lot of social changes. It had captivated people's imagination. People were very impacted by the Christian faith. So from a governance point of view, from a point of view of authorities, they are concerned of the impact that the religion could have on social order and on how people respond to authorities. Right. And because of the persecution that came from the Jews as well as the Roman authorities, by the second century, many Christians, many believers have gone into hiding because of the threats to their lives, right? Many of them have gone into hiding in places what we know as today as the catacombs, right? Christians living underground to preserve their lives. During this period, Gnosticism was a common belief during this season, and Gnosticism is actually a belief comprising many branches, but one belief was this, that people are saved by acquiring secret knowledge. So this particular idea, this particular philosophy is influenced by various kinds of Greek philosophy. Right. Greek ideas were really the dominant ideas of that period. As mentioned in an earlier lesson, even though the Greek Empire was no longer powerful, but because of their ideas, the Roman Empire after overthrowing the Greek Empire, continued to take those ideas because they found the Greek ideas to be something that they found to be progressive. So the Greek ideas continue to influence the Roman society of that period, right? And people who are educated would engage in practices that are very common to the Greek ideas of the time, is where people spend time debating, people spend time sharing different ideas and knowledge that they have, right? And for many people who grew up in that environment, who belong to that culture, many of them who became Christians continued that practice. So whatever they understood and know about exchange of ideas, they took that practice into their faith, right, as they try to understand Bible concepts. So whatever they understood of the Bible, or whatever they try to understand the Bible, they continue that practice of debating, exchange of ideas, right? And many of them, because of their influence by the Greek philosophies, their attempts to interpret the Bible was very much through these kind of worldviews. They try to understand the Bible through their Greek philosophies without necessarily being able to realize that there is a Jewish context to understanding how God is to be understood. Right. So during this period, as Christianity continued to grow, Christianity also faced persecution, right? And this persecution was intensified during the reign of a certain Roman emperor called Diocletian, right? This particular emperor was also responsible for the burning of Bibles, right? So there was heavy persecution of the Christian faith during this period. It did change, however, during the time of Constantine, another Roman emperor, right? Now, for various reasons, he began to realize that Christianity can be something that he can use to his advantage. There were a couple of events that occurred that allowed him to realize perhaps he could use Christianity for political gain. So as such, he began to establish Christianity as the main religion of the Roman Empire. Right. So back then, because the Roman Empire controlled the region, right, they introduced what they called the universal faith, right? The Catholic faith. The word Catholic basically means universal. So back then, the universal faith, the faith that is preferred for people in the Roman Empire, is the brand of Christianity that Constantine was trying to promote for political gain, right? And because of that, many people converted to Christianity because of the benefits it brings with it, right? If you are a Christian, therefore, it allows you certain political, social, economic benefits. At the same time, if you are not a Christian, I mean, you become a second-class citizen, and in fact, there are times whereby, you could be at risk of harms and threats if you do not follow the universal faith. Separately, as Christianity continued to develop, as Christianity continued to grow amongst those who are educated, you have different religious councils that try to meet up to try to make firm statements about the nature of who God is, right? And this happened as a result of the highly robust debates that is commonplace amongst people at the time. People felt a need to debate, people felt a need to argue over who God is. Now, as Christianity continued into the 4th and 5th and the 6th century, bear in mind, by this time, most of the believers who have gone underground because of the heavy persecution, right? And those who are considered believers were probably believers in a certain system, in the system that the Roman Empire has promoted, right? A certain universal faith that doesn't necessarily follow the teachings of the Bible, but it was made a national religion, right, for the purposes of political control over different things, right? The Roman Empire has always covered a large area, right? And this large area comprises countries and nations that conquered, right? Cultures that they have conquered. And in the way they rule, they've always taken a very loose approach. They've always taken a very loose approach in the way they manage the cultures and a faith. They allow them to do what they want to do as long as they continue to submit to the authorities, right? So while they are trying to get across the universal faith, this Catholic faith, basically they allow the cultures of different areas to integrate this brand of Christianity with their own local beliefs, right? Because the authorities realize that's one way to make this new faith more acceptable to the local people. So when they did that, they allowed Christianity to be blended and integrated with different kinds of cultures and beliefs of the different region. And over time, as Rome became weaker as an empire and soon fell to the barbarians, right, their cultures and their religion were readily adopted by their conquerors. Why is this so? Because the conquerors have always viewed Rome as a place of culture, Rome as a place of progress, and therefore they were more than glad to adopt the culture and adopt the religions of the Roman Empire. Right. So what you see so far is over 500 years, different influences that impacted how this Christian faith is being managed, at least at the organization level. And as we move to what historians have called the Dark Ages, right, we begin to see the Christian faith, at least that which is visible, managed by organizations and political institutions, drift further and further away from the original teachings of the Bible, right? This is a season whereby countries and political powers continue to use religion as a reason to fight wars, right? So country A or empire A will go to war, right, rallying its people, say that no, this is what God would want us to do. And likewise, you have another empire, right, who will do the same. That no, so everyone was going to war, right, claiming the rights or the legitimacy to certain places because they feel that it is their God-given right to do so, and they are able to do so because their gods have given them the blessing to do so. So religion has been used by countries for political purposes, right? And so those who are in power often use religion as a way to suppress people or groups that didn't agree with them, right? So you see these two different periods of time. This is probably still true in different pockets of the world today, but back then, where religion and politics was so highly integrated, this is where you see the intermingling and often basically the corruption of religion by politics, right? And one of it was really using religion to even for financial gain, right? And that's what countries do when they go to war, using religion. Oftentimes it is not just for political gain, but it's also for economic gain. So you can see that over a period of 1,500 years, the faith that was preached by the disciples, right, carrying on from what they have in the Jewish faith, right, have undergone various kinds of challenges. The genuine believers, most of them were forced underground because of the heavy persecution. Whatever remained was taken and politicized, made to be used for those in power, and used for their own advantages. All right. Now, I guess one question most people will ask is, how can something be so far from what it was meant to be originally? How could the Christian faith be so different from what is actually mentioned and taught in the Bible? Many historians today have looked at this period of time in history in Europe as really the Dark Ages. They see this period of time whereby there's a lot of unrest, a lot of corruption. Right. So there are some contributing factors we can look at. Education and literacy was only available to the elites. Not everyone had a chance to be educated. Not everyone had a chance to learn how to read. And as a result, therefore, people have very little ways to really double check and verify what is accurate or not. So when a religious leader or a political leader says that this is something that is said by God or something that's taught in the faith, the common folk had no way to verify this information. Okay, and typically they will just go with what is being taught to them. And as I mentioned before, most genuine believers had already gone underground by then, so there was very little ways for them to check with those who are genuine believers. Right. Also mentioned is this, that religion and politics became so closely tied that one is often used to exploit the other, right? And because they are so closely tied, it is very difficult for people to reject or to contest or to resist what is being taught, because they could easily be, one could be easily used to overpower the others. However, all is not lost when it comes to the things of God, right? Because the Bible says that there's always a handful of people who are faithful to keeping God's word. Right? And since the past 500 years or so, God's truths that were preserved have been gradually restored, right, at various points through different people. And we'll be covering this in subsequent lessons on the Reformation. And here are a few Bible verses to kind of like reinforce this point as we close out this session, right? Let me just read Acts chapter 14. In the past, God permitted all nations to go their own way, but he never left them without evidence of himself and his goodness. It is the same today, for a few of the people of Israel have remained faithful because of God's grace, his undeserved kindness in choosing them. Right? So they are always faithful people. Right? And God's promise about his word, heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. So in his word, God has promised that whatever he has promised Abraham, that there will always be people called by his name. However, whatever God has promised about his truths, right, they will prevail, and is seen through the generations, right, of God's people. Even if they've gone underground, they continue to be faithful. All right, so that's all we have for this particular session. Thank you very much.